In the twilight hours before dawn, when shadows dance between worlds and the veil grows thin, ancient voices whisper of a time when the very foundations of creation trembled. This is the story of a battle that shook the heavens themselves, a conflict between order and chaos that would determine the fate of gods and mortals alike. Long before empires rose from desert sands, before the first ziggurats pierced the Mesopotamian sky, the cosmos itself hung in delicate balance. The ancient Sumerians understood what we have forgotten, that creation is not a single moment, but an eternal struggle between the forces that build and those that would tear asunder. In the realm of the gods, high above the mortal world, dwelt Enlil, the great mountain, lord of wind and storm. His breath moved the clouds across the heavens, his voice commanded the hurricanes, and his will shaped the very air that mortals breathed. Enlil was not merely a god of nature, but the embodiment of divine authority itself, the keeper of cosmic law and the guardian of celestial order. The palace of Enlil rose like a crystalline mountain in the heart of heaven, its walls carved from starlight and its foundations rooted in the bedrock of eternity. Yet for all his power, Enlil possessed something far more precious than his dominion over wind and storm. In the deepest vault of his palace lay the tablets of destiny. These were no mere stone slabs inscribed with mortal laws, but the very blueprints of existence itself, containing the fundamental codes that governed reality. Upon these tablets were written the names of every star in its course, every season in its cycle, every tide in its turning. The tablets held the power to reshape the cosmos, to alter the flow of time itself, to grant dominion over all creation. The tablets pulsed with an inner light that seemed to contain all colors and none, their surface shifting like liquid mercury as the cosmic patterns evolved and changed. To gaze upon them was to see the mathematical poetry of existence, the divine algorithms that transformed void into substance, silence into song, darkness into light. But even in the heart of heaven, shadows gathered. Far from the orderly halls of Enlil's palace, in the liminal spaces between creation and void, dwelt a being whose very existence was an affront to cosmic order. Anzu was his name, though to speak it was to invite chaos into one's throat. Part eagle, part lion, part storm wind given flesh, Anzu embodied the primal forces that preceded creation itself. His wings, vast as thunderclouds, could eclipse the sun with their shadow. His talons, sharp as crystallized lightning, could rend the fabric of reality itself. His eyes burned with the fire of unborn stars, and his cry was the sound of worlds ending and beginning in the same breath. For eons uncounted, Anzu had prowled the boundaries of creation, testing the limits of divine authority, searching for weakness in the cosmic structure. He had watched as Enlil shaped the world, as order was carved from primordial darkness, as the first laws were written into the foundation stones of reality. And with each act of creation, Anzu's resentment had grown. The sight of mortals scurrying about their ordered lives, following patterns prescribed by gods they could not see, filled Anzu with a rage that burned hotter than the core of dying stars. He saw in their structured existence a prison more terrible than any dungeon, a cage built from habit and expectation that trapped both body and spirit. In the swirling tempests of his domain, Anzu began to weave a plan as intricate as any web, as patient as continental drift. He would not merely rebel against the cosmic order. He would seize the very source of that order and remake reality according to his own wild design. The tablets of destiny would be his. The opportunity came in a moment of divine routine. On the day when the cosmic scales needed rebalancing, Enlil would descend to the chamber of cosmic harmonies deep within his palace. Here he would perform the delicate work of maintaining universal equilibrium, a task that required absolute concentration. During these moments, Enlil's attention was necessarily turned inward, focused on the quantum dance of existence itself. His divine awareness, normally spanning all of creation, contracted to a single point of crystalline focus. Anzu had waited through countless cosmic cycles for such a moment. The great eagle lion moved through the void like shadow-given substance, his passage unmarked by any cosmic sensor, his presence masked by techniques learned in the chaotic spaces beyond creation. He had made himself into living absence, a hole in reality that even divine perception could not detect. As Enlil began his cosmic attunement, Anzu struck with the swiftness of thought made manifest. Through corridors of crystallized starlight he flew, past guardian spirits whose attention was focused outward rather than in, toward the very heart of divine authority. The tablets of destiny lay in their cosmic vault, pulsing with the rhythm of creation itself, their surface alive with the constantly shifting equations of existence. Without hesitation, without pause for the cosmic implications of his act, Anzu grasped the tablets in his mighty talons. The moment his claws touched their surface, reality convulsed like a struck bell. The sound that emerged was not heard but felt, a vibration that rippled through every level of existence. The theft was more than mere burglary. It was a fundamental violation of cosmic law, a rupture in the ordered structure of reality that sent shockwaves through every dimension. In the chamber of cosmic harmonies, Enlil felt the theft like a physical blow, a tearing sensation that reached into the very core of his divine being. The harmonious song of creation that had filled his consciousness was suddenly replaced by a discordant shriek, the sound of reality itself crying out in pain. The god's eyes blazed with the fury of hurricanes as he realized what had occurred. The tablets of destiny, the very source of cosmic order, had been stolen. The implications were staggering, the potential consequences beyond calculation. In the wrong hands, those tablets could unmake creation itself. From his perch on a mountain of crystallized chaos, Anzu gazed upon the tablets with eyes that burned like dying galaxies. The power he had sought for so long was finally within his grasp. The fundamental codes of reality spread before him like an open book, written in languages of pure possibility. With ceremonial deliberation, Anzu began to study the tablet's contents, deciphering the mathematical poetry that governed all existence. But as he delved deeper into their mysteries, he began to understand the true magnitude of his theft. These were not merely tools of power, but instruments of terrible responsibility. The realization should have given him pause, should have awakened some measure of cosmic wisdom. Instead, it only fed his ambition. With claws that could rend the fabric of space-time itself, Anzu began to inscribe new patterns onto the tablet's surface. Where once had been written the laws of ordered growth, He carved equations of beautiful chaos. The effects were immediate and catastrophic. Across the cosmos, the careful balance that Enlil had maintained for eons began to collapse. Planets wandered from their orbits like lost children. Stars began to burn with alien colors, and the fundamental forces that held matter together started to fluctuate wildly. In the world below, mortals watched in terror as their ordered existence began to fray at the edges. The sun rose in the west and set in the north. The tides obeyed no lunar schedule, and the very ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with an uncertain rhythm. But the chaos that delighted Anzu filled Enlil with a determination that burned brighter than any star. This violation of cosmic order could not be allowed to stand. If reality itself was to survive, then Anzu had to be stopped. The god of wind and storm began to prepare for war. He donned armor forged from crystallized lightning, weapons carved from the bones of dead hurricanes, and a cloak woven from the northern lights themselves. This would not be ritual combat, but a battle that would determine the very nature of existence. When the gods turned their attention to the spaces between worlds where Anzu had made his stronghold, they discovered something that chilled their divine hearts. The great eagle lion had not merely stolen the tablets, he had merged with them, becoming a living embodiment of chaotic possibility. His form now pulsed with the power of unwritten laws. With a gesture that commanded hurricanes, Enlil stepped forward into the void between worlds. His passage through the cosmic deep was marked by stabilizing ripples, temporary islands of order in an increasingly chaotic sea. The journey to Anzu's domain was a descent through layers of possibility into realms. Where normal laws held only tentative sway, Anzu had built his fortress from crystallized chaos, its walls shifting between states of matter and energy with each passing moment. From the highest tower, he watched the approach of his divine adversary with eyes that now held the depth of unwritten possibilities. So, Lord of Winds, Anzu called out, his voice carrying harmonics that made reality shiver. You come to reclaim your precious order, but look around you. See how much more beautiful the cosmos becomes when freed from your rigid constraints. Enlil's response was not in words, but in action. With a gesture that summoned the fury of every storm that had ever raged across the world's surface, he began his assault on Anzu's stronghold. Lightning that could unmake mountains struck the fortress walls. Hurricanes that could scatter galaxies hammered against its foundations. The battle that followed was unlike anything that had ever been witnessed in the history of creation. It was a conflict fought not just with divine power, but with fundamental principles of existence. Each blow struck by Enlil carried the weight of cosmic law, while Anzu's counterattacks embodied the wild freedom of uncontrolled possibility. Lightning met chaos wind in collisions that sent shockwaves through dimensions that mortals could never perceive. The very concepts of time and space became weapons in their conflict, wielded with a skill that transformed the abstract into the viscerally real. The fortress itself became part of the battlefield, its walls flowing like liquid while maintaining their structural integrity. Enlil found himself fighting not just an enemy, but an entire realm that had been redesigned according to principles that challenged his fundamental understanding of reality. As the battle raged, Anzu began to demonstrate the true extent of his transformation. Drawing upon the power of the stolen tablets, He rewrote local reality with each gesture, turning Enlil's own attacks against him, transforming the gods' ordered assaults into chaotic energies that fed Anzu's growing power. For a moment that lasted either an eternity or an instant, it seemed as though Anzu might be right. The Eagle Lion's power continued to grow as he absorbed the chaotic energies of their conflict, his form becoming ever more magnificent and terrible. But Enlil had not maintained cosmic order for eons, without learning something about the nature of persistence. Where Anzu drew his power from change and possibility, Enlil's strength came from the deep currents of continuity that run beneath all transformation. He was the embodiment of those fundamental principles that allow change to occur, without destroying the framework that makes existence possible. With this realization, Enlil's strategy shifted. Instead of meeting chaos with greater order, he began to work with the deeper currents that underlay both order and chaos. He stopped fighting the changes that Anzu wrought and began to guide them, to channel the Eagle Lion's chaotic energies toward patterns that could be sustained. The effect was subtle at first, barely perceptible even to divine senses, but gradually, Anzu's wild transformations began to take on a rhythm, a subtle underlying structure that neither denied chaos nor imposed rigid order. It was the rhythm of waves breaking on a shore, of seasons cycling through their changes, of hearts beating in time with the pulse of life itself. Anzu felt the shift like a trap closing around him. His chaotic energies, which had seemed so free and unlimited, were being woven into patterns that he could not break without destroying the very power that sustained him. The more he fought against the emerging structure, the more tightly it bound him. With desperate fury, Anzu began to inscribe new and more radical changes onto the tablet's surface. Alterations so fundamental that they threatened to dissolve the very concept of existence into pure possibility. The cosmos shuddered as reality itself began to consider whether it had ever truly existed. But in that moment of ultimate chaos, Enlil revealed the depth of his understanding. With a gesture that contained all the gentleness of a spring breeze and all the power of a cosmic hurricane, he reached out and touched Anzu's transformed essence. The touch was not violent, not destructive, but transformative in the deepest sense. It reminded Anzu of something he had forgotten in his pursuit of absolute freedom. That chaos without some underlying structure is not liberation, but annihilation. That possibility without some framework of actualization is not power, but paralysis. In that moment of divine contact, Anzu saw what his victory would truly mean. If he succeeded in his complete rewriting of reality, if he dissolved all structure and order into pure chaotic possibility, the result would not be the beautiful freedom he had envisioned, but the end of all experience, all consciousness, all existence. The realization struck Anzu like a thunderbolt of understanding. His grip on the tablets loosened as the true implications of his actions became clear. He had sought to free existence from the constraints of order, but those constraints were not prisons, they were the very conditions that made existence possible. With a sound like the sigh of dying storms, Anzu released the tablets of destiny. They fell through the spaces between worlds like stones of crystallized starlight, their passage leaving trails of restored order in the chaotic realm. Enlil caught the tablets with the care of a gardener handling the seeds of next year's harvest. As his hands closed around them, waves of stabilizing energy rippled outward through the cosmos. Planets resumed their proper orbits. Stars began to sing in harmonious keys once again. And in the world below, mortals felt their hearts steady as the natural order reasserted itself. But Enlil did not immediately depart. Instead, he remained in the chaotic realm, studying Anzu with eyes that held not triumph, but a profound sadness. "You could have been magnificent," Enlil said softly. "Your vision of possibility, your challenge to complacency, these are not evil things. But you forgot that even freedom requires some structure." The conversation that followed was unlike any that had ever occurred in the history of creation. It was a dialogue between order and chaos, between structure and possibility. Anzu spoke of his vision of a cosmos unbound by rigid laws. Enlil shared his understanding of the delicate balance required to maintain conditions where consciousness could emerge and life could flourish. As they talked, both divine beings began to recognize something that neither had fully grasped before. Order and chaos were not opposing forces locked in eternal conflict, but complementary aspects of a deeper truth. The beauty of existence lay in the dynamic tension between them, in the dance of pattern and possibility. From their dialogue emerged a new understanding, a synthesis that neither had achieved alone. Together, they began to revise the tablets of destiny, encoding principles of dynamic balance that would allow existence to remain stable enough for consciousness while remaining flexible enough to evolve and grow. When their work was complete, Enlil prepared to return to his palace in the heavens. But before departing, he turned to Anzu with an offer that surprised even himself. The cosmos needs guardians who understand both order and possibility. Would you consent to become such a guardian? Anzu considered the offer with gravity. To accept would mean abandoning his role as pure chaos, but it would also mean participating in the ongoing creation of reality, helping to guide the cosmos toward greater complexity and beauty while maintaining necessary stability. "I accept," Anzu said finally, "but I will remain what I am: the force that questions, that challenges, that refuses to accept that any pattern is so perfect it cannot be improved." And so the great battle ended not with the destruction of one principle by another, but with their synthesis into something greater than either could achieve alone. The tablets of destiny now encoded a more sophisticated understanding of the relationship between order and possibility. The effects of their synthesis rippled through every level of existence. In the world below, mortals found their lives enriched by a new balance between security and adventure, between tradition and innovation. The cosmos had learned to sing a new melody, one that honored both the deep rhythms of order and the wild improvisations of chaos. This is the legacy of the battle between Enlil and Anzu. Not the victory of one principle over another, but the birth of wisdom that recognizes the sacred necessity of both stability and change, structure and freedom, the known and the possible. In their conflict and eventual synthesis, the cosmos itself grew wiser, more beautiful, more capable of supporting the ongoing adventure of consciousness as it explores the infinite possibilities of existence.